Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. Today, as the ORSAM Center for Middle Eastern Studies, we are starting a new panel with the distinguished speakers and researchers and civil society. And our topic today is the impact of coronavirus on Muslim communities in Europe. Actually, I mean, this coronavirus is unprecedented that we have. The world maybe did not see such a widespread pandemic so far because of globalization and because of many different dynamics that we have. The disease spread all over the world and affecting the lives of everybody. So we are part of it, and our region also is part of it, and everybody is feeling the effects of this pandemic. And especially the Muslim communities that were already having some problems with the rise of racism or right-wing radicalism and some economic difficulties, etc. And also there is more pressure with the crisis in the Middle East, putting more people to the forefront and pushing them maybe from their homes or to migrate to Europe. And you know, the tension or the dynamic did not stop yet. So we have a very fluid situation and very dynamic situation vis-a-vis the Muslim communities in Europe. And as the ORSAM Center, we are following the developments as a specialty. We are focusing on the Middle East and especially the Arab communities, Arab world. But we are following anything that also relates to Arabs and Turks and Muslim communities. Of course, we have non-Arab and non-Turkish communities in Europe, but you know, we are pretty much interested in the state of or the situation of Muslim communities, including Arab diaspora and other Muslim diaspora, and especially we have a strong diaspora in some European countries. And we have, as I said, very distinguished experts, including the moderator, the Professor Talip Küçükcan, and other speakers. Of course, as a moderator, he will introduce them to you. I want to say welcome to everybody, and I hope we can have a very useful discussion today. Dr. Talip, please welcome every speakers, and the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmed. It's a pleasure to be the moderator of this critical panel on coronavirus and its impact on the Muslim diaspora. Well, there's a strong Muslim diaspora in Europe and beyond, actually, but the coronavirus has been changing almost everything: politics, economy, our daily life. And of course, Muslim communities all around the world, including Europe, is not isolated from such events. So today we will be talking about how coronavirus has been impacting Muslims in Europe and what kind of reactions and responses the Muslim community has come up with. And also we will be looking at the future, how such kind of crisis can be handled by Muslim communities, by Muslim civil society organizations, as well as Muslim leadership. And also we will touch on the relations between the Muslim diaspora and also the country of origins, what modalities of relationship that they have developed in order to cope with the impact of the crisis. Today we have got four excellent speakers. Analyst Tikriti joins us from London, from Britain. Bülent, Bilgi, and Dalya, Cakar join us from Germany, where there is also a very strong Muslim diaspora. And Abdennour, Toumi joins us from France, where there is a great number of Muslims. So I will start off with Analyst Tikriti. In the first round, we will be looking at the current situation on the ground. The coronavirus has changed many things, as we have said, and also many people are infected. Some people lost their lives, unfortunately, and the trend continues. And minorities, refugees, and Muslim communities in particular have already experienced a number of problems. As far as the data provided by the social science and also European research centers and think tanks, Muslim communities face a number of problems as far as discrimination, unemployment, labeling are concerned. So we will also look at whether such areas are also are relevant topics in highlighting the crisis brought about by the coronavirus. Now, I'm now giving the floor to Mr. Tikriti to map out the situation in Britain as far as the coronavirus and its impact on Muslims are concerned. The health services, employment, access to welfare, etc. The floor is yours, Mr. Tikriti, and you have got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Talib, and thank you to Dr. Ahmed Wisal and to ORSAM. I think that the topic that we're discussing today is extremely important, simply because that Europe has been the epicenter of the coronavirus for a very long time, far longer than China was, where this virus is eliminated. In the next 3 to 4 minutes, I'd like to outline the main issues which I feel are extremely relevant to our discussion today, and hopefully then the other eminent speakers, as well as in the discussion, we can then fill in the details. The first thing that I'd like to address is the UK government response to the coronavirus. Very simply, very briefly put, there is an almost consensus that the response of the UK government has been chaotic, and that it has been inadequate, too late, and that essentially the guidelines offered are mostly quite confusing and often quite contradictory. Many of you might have followed the scandal that engulfed the government in the past 2 weeks, when the senior Prime Minister advisor actually broke the lockdown in a very flagrant manner, but the government refused to condemn him or bring him to task, which created even more confusion throughout. The importance of this, whilst I would claim that almost no government could have actually dealt with this successfully, because it was sweeping, it was too comprehensive. But I think that the most important thing in conditions such as this is that there is a level of confidence and trust between the public and the government, which will tell them, sit at home and suffer the consequences mentally, socially, economically, everything as a result of this lockdown. They need to have a level of trust and confidence that the government is doing what is in their best interest. When this level of trust is no longer there or is broken, then we will have a very, very difficult situation to deal with. The second point I'd like to touch upon is the impact of the coronavirus on what in Britain we call the BAME communities, the BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. It is now proven scientifically that the impact of the coronavirus on the members of these communities, including the Muslim communities, is far greater in terms of proportionality than it is on the rest of society. Why that is, still there is research being done, and there are certain theories and the such. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of those who gave their lives working at the front line, whether in the health services or in the public services, do constitute members of the BAME communities more than others. So the actual impact from the medical point of view on the Muslim communities is something that we can't turn our gazes away from. And we must try to understand exactly why that is and put into place the policies that would actually avert that in the future. The third, which I think everyone will talk about, is the economic challenges. The economic impact, particularly on the Muslim communities and the minority communities in the UK, has been absolutely devastating and probably crippling. And I would talk on the individual level, people who haven't had an income for 2, probably 3 months, as well as on the community level, how that will impact the communities and their growth and their development. But also, as Muslim communities, we know that the pillars of our communities are the mosques and Islamic centers. And those have suffered immensely because mostly their income comes from generating the donations that come from the 5 prayers a day, as well as the Friday Jum'ah prayers. And that has been absolutely non-existent. So the impact on these mosques will be absolutely devastating, and probably for the next few months, the communities that usually are very, very given, especially in the month of Ramadan, like we just had, extremely generously, was almost non-existent this time around. And this will have a telling impact, and we need to assess how the communities will be impacted on the long run as a result. And the final point that I want to touch upon is that whilst, yes, the UK has effectively left the European Union, but we're still part of Europe. And we are still impacted by the policies of the EU, particularly, especially not just as in itself as a structure, but also its role on the global stage. It's the EU itself as a structure, I would allege, is under threat. Whether it has a long-term future or not, I think that is in question. The fact is that the EU dealt very, very badly, very, very poorly in response to the to this pandemic, and we can talk about this in detail. But that will also have an impact not only on its internal structure, but also on its global role, particularly in issues that pertain to the MENA region, to the Middle East and North Africa. And I think that we need to actually assess what was going on, what Europe was doing, and how economically as well as politically that will be impacted as a result of the aftermath of the coronavirus. I will stop here, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you have summarized fairly successfully in 5 minutes, and also you have pointed out some of the I think challenges. Now let's move to Germany, where there is also a strong Turkish Muslim community, and also Muslim communities from the Balkans, and also from Syria and from the Arab world. I would like to turn to Mr. Bülent Bilgi, who is the director and chairman of the Union of International Democrats. What is the case with Germany? How far Germany and German government responded to the virus, and whether the Muslim community have been impacted? You know, as many research findings indicate that minorities are more vulnerable than any other groups. What is the case with the Muslim community in Germany, and how far the German government responded to the demands and requirements by the society at large? The floor is yours, Bülent. Can you turn your mic, please?
Sorry, it's my fault. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting and giving me the opportunity to provide my thoughts regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to greet all honorable participants and spectators on that screen. Yes, how is the situation in Germany? I would like to look to the situation from two perspectives, which are really important, I think so, because the first one is the public healthcare perspective, and the second one would be the socio-economic perspective. At first, we need to say that we haven't got a homogeneous situation in Europe regarding public healthcare. When we look to Germany, the health insurance, everybody has an insurance, and the health infrastructure is also very well. When you look to the hospitals or to medical staff or medical equipment is there as well. So we have a proper situation regarding healthcare in Germany. That's for sure. But when, as I said at the beginning, that we haven't got an homogeneous situation in Europe, when we look to other countries, to Italy, to Spain, to Greece as well, and to France, and Belgium as well. So in these countries, the situation is not so proper, not so well, like in Germany. Our branch in Belgium, a few weeks ago, our branch in Belgium went to the France border in the woods, where refugees lived in the woods. They have no health insurance, they have nothing. They have no sanitary infrastructure. They have nothing. They are living in tents. So when we look to the situation in terms of migrants and refugees in Germany, there is a very well environment, very well situation. But unfortunately, in other countries, not, as I said before. And so what we can see is the situation, how it is for the people, for the biological German or a biological Belgian. So when the situation is good for him, so the situation is also good for the migrants and for the refugees. And this is what we can see currently in Europe. And we can come back to you if you want later on. But the second important thing is what we need to speak about is the socio-economic perspective, because the Muslims in Europe, especially in Germany or in whole Europe, they are mainly workers or owner of small and mid-sized companies, as you know. And let's say restaurants, barber shops, small markets, there are in the construction sector as well. So these people are a little bit afraid currently, as well as in Germany. But the German government took good actions, and they supported all the companies, the big companies and the small companies as well, with immediate aid. And the companies are also in a relatively well situation currently. But the socio-economic perspective, when we took it, so nobody knows how long this situation will hold on. And the only thing in Germany, the people with Muslims or Turks, from people from Turkey, the current situation is making them afraid. The unknown makes them afraid. This would be the correct situation or description from my point of view. So the unknown situation is the most worst thing what we have currently. And the socio-economic perspective, when you see that your future is that you don't know how your future will be, how the future of your company will be, or how the future of your working place will be, so you are unsure and you feel unwell. And this leads to psychological problems, issues within the family, in the neighborhood. So these are things which are also important and should be discussed as well in the politics and in other areas as well, especially in the area of NGOs. So these are main points which are discussing in Europe, especially in Germany.
Well, thank you very much, Bülent. And you have, I think, outlined the case in Germany, which differs from, of course, many other countries. I think each and every country deserves to be looked at carefully. We are not trying to have a monolithic and essentialist perspective here. Of course, we need to, I think, look at in a plural, in a diverse sense. Now, let's move on to France, where there is a large Muslim minority, especially from the North African countries, from Maghreb. And already we know that, when you look at the housing issues, when you look at the education success, when you look at the employment rates, unemployment rates, Muslims are already a disadvantaged group. They are a vulnerable group. And of course, what we have noted during the crisis, especially in relation to the responses by the individual governments, European Union didn't come up with a comprehensive, I think, system or methodology. Each and every country was left on their own. Therefore, maybe we can also look at this aspect when it comes to France, how far France benefited from European Union, whether there was a cooperation or the French government was on its own to deal with the crisis. Now, I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Toumi from Paris, from France, to map out the situation as the events are now unfolding in France. Floor is yours, Mr. Toumi. Can you turn on your mic as well, please?
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to our audience and viewers, and also have special thank for our President, President Ahmet Orsar, President of ORSAM, and all the team who were behind this event. A special thank for all of them. And also, I am honored to be part with this distinguished panel. So, as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned in France, so France is not actually has been hit hard like other developed countries. However, France has a kind of a special, let's say, status on this public health issue that turned into a crisis. Because for many years and even decades, especially, I mean, the world was looking at France as a model in terms of its healthcare system. And just a quick note here, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in the US, and it happened to be during the Obamacare issue. And most of Americans, they were blaming Obama for copying the French system. So decades later, or 8 years or later, so it turned out to the French healthcare system is not that efficient. But again, it's not about the system itself as it is about the politicians and the leadership who did fail miserably in this crisis because it didn't look at the issue as it had to be at the moment when it started. We read and we heard some quote-unquote experts on the field that they call it just basic or banal cold. And then it turned out to become serious. So now, it's no doubt today, in the aftermath of the severe crisis that the entire world dealt with, the corona pandemic now, it's like the 9/11 for geopolitics, meaning by this, so all the theories of macroeconomics and the public policies in terms of healthcare system, Medicare, will be changed and will be different than it used to be 2 months or 3 months ago. Okay, so for the Muslim community here in France, and I have to be specific a little bit on the community. Unfortunately, it's not that homogeneous. It's not a community. I think there is a reason why in the title we pluralized community. It's communities. And it's not new. It has been going on again for decades. So the Muslim community here in France, it's not that united. And for many reasons, for political reasons, and also they brought some of them, the old guard brought this, let's say, misjudgment and to some extent misunderstanding the mentality of their origin countries to here in France. But during this crisis, there were some good signs that led the Muslim community to think that it's a serious matter and has to be united and has to be to deal with the issue as a whole and as collectively and not individually or separately. But there are other questions that the Muslim community is facing and has been facing for, again, so long. Actually, again, to some point, the issue of the Muslim/Arabs has become like a chronic disease in the French politics. It's at any time there is such an issue that touches the Muslim community, it's a selling point for the, let's say, not anymore like it has to be left-right debate. Now in France, there is no such a thing. There is only one thing, it's politicians. So the right actually capitalized on this, as well as the far right. But on the other hand, the Muslim community also is not taking this seriously. Here comes the question of the leadership. The leaders, they deal with this issue.
Mr. Toumi, we will come to the leadership issue in the other rounds. Maybe so the mapping out is now the priority. Then we can move on to that issue.
Sure. But I have like two main questions. So how are they? I mean, the Muslim community, how is like coping with the pandemic? What effects will be on their socioeconomic situation, and where does this pandemic will lead socially, economically, and politically? This is the main three questions that I will be interested to focus on in the second session. And thank you very much.
Sure, thank you very much. I think these are all significant questions that we need to turn to. Now, I would like to talk about a little bit NGO issues because Dalya has been involved in the NGO for a long time, and I think she is the right person to talk about it. My question to you is the following, actually. Now, we have got two main actors in the field in response to coronavirus. One is the state as an official actor. The other one is NGOs and civil society. How do you see the unfolding of crisis from the perspective of civil society? Because the state and the bureaucracy has its own priority. What is the main perspective and priorities of the NGOs as you are involved in this issue, Dalya? The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hello and salam alaikum, merhaba from Germany. To all the participants, first of all, I would like to thank you and especially ORSAM, of course, for the invitation and giving me the chance to contribute to this very important panel. As you stated before, I am the chairwoman of an NGO based in Germany, and we were very active in the last few months because of COVID-19. So just to come to the topic itself, the COVID-19 had not only huge impact on our health, but also on human, social, and economic affairs and social matters, of course. It has been characterized as a pandemic by the World Health Association and therefore attacked the societies at their core. In my speech, I will focus on the social and religious impacts of the virus on the Muslim, mainly the Turkish community in Germany, and especially on the women, because our community is or our association has mainly women members. And because of its importance, I will focus on the Ramadan time. The other issue is that we have also prepared an empiric study. I will also present the results of the empiric study to you. And just to come to your question, this is like, of course, NGOs are more flexible, for example, like than the states. There is less bureaucracy, and we can reach the people better through our own channels. So this is what we have also experienced during the pandemic time. As we all know, Ramadan is the time of gathering and meeting, solidarity and harmony. In all over the world, in every country, the Muslims meet for communal iftars, sahurs, tarawihs, family meetings, or doing umrah during this time. Consequently, there was the huge concern that the virus would be hard to control. Therefore, the mosques were shut down all over the world and people were not allowed to gather. So at the first sight, this was a huge shock for the Muslim community because people were afraid that Ramadan would have no spirit this year. Furthermore, there was the concern that the people would also suffer psychologically. So this is a huge social impact on the communities because they were somehow double locked. The lockdown itself plus Ramadan was really somehow big pressure on the people's minds. But later on, the restrictions has changed somehow in a positive way because we communicated to them how they can use this time in the best way possible for themselves, for their health, and also for the society by taking social responsibility for the people who are not so privileged as we are in Europe. So this is what I will tell in detail in the next part of my speech.
Okay, thank you very much. I think
welcome.
You gave us a very important clue about the wider impact of the coronavirus, because everybody is now concerned about maybe economy, but there's, I think, beyond that, the psychology of the people, the youth and the women. I think gender perspective from, I think this dimension is quite important. And in the second and third round, we will be very pleased to hear your findings as far as the situation is concerned. Now I'm going back to London again, because Mr. Tikriti has already, I think, mentioned a number of issues on the impact of virus on the pandemic on the religious, I think, dimension, the religious life of the Muslim community. I think there is a similar picture as we can see in other countries as well when it comes to Ramadan, because the Muslim families and the Muslim community are very close-knit community. But at this time, there was some kind of, I think, disruption. What we can call this a huge disruption in the daily lives of people. And now I would like to just hear from you, Mr. Tikriti, what were the responses of the Muslim community? Because we know that in Britain there are strong Muslim civil society organizations, volunteer organizations, and what was their policy? What was their activity in order to, let's say, at least, reduce the impact of coronavirus? Because communities were, I think, isolated from each other for some time because of the lockdown, because of the fear of getting infection. So how would you, let's say, see the activities of the Muslims, whether they are well organized, whether they were not well organized, and also their relations with the state and bureaucracy? How far their functions and functionality was in favor of Muslims there in Britain?
Firstly, I'd like to pick up on what Abdennour, Toumi, as well as Dalya Hanım, what they mentioned. Firstly, in terms of the emotional, mental impact on the community, as well as what Mr. Toumi said regarding the Muslim community not being a homogeneous entity, but being a mosaic of communities and gatherings and the such, each with their own traditions, cultures, ways and norms and the such. So this needs to be taken into consideration. However, there are two things that I'd like to say. The first is that, as I mentioned in my first introduction, the Muslim community, part of the Bami community in Britain, was largely at the front line, what we called in the UK, what the government classified as key workers, whether they be people who work in the National Health Service or whether they be providing services that society cannot run without, drivers, bus drivers, cleaners, council workers and the such. The Muslim community constitutes quite a large portion of that. So basically, the visibility of Muslims was far greater during the time of lockdown, and they're putting themselves out at times of risk was something that was highly appreciated by the majority, I would suggest, of society. And obviously, for instance, I mean, the first 5 doctors who gave their lives as a result of their working with patients trying to save their lives were Muslims. The first 5 who died. So this was something that was. But the point that Dalya mentions, I think, is quite crucial. As I mentioned, the economic impact is going to be far great, and it is, and it will be. But the social and emotional kind of impact on the community itself is extremely significant and quite difficult to measure. It will take a while, probably a few months, for us to realize the impact on this. But at the same time, I would like to also highlight on the positive side that the Muslim community, and particularly at times of Ramadan, but not exclusively, but particularly in Ramadan, are extremely organized. They're very, very well organized. And because of, firstly, our religion and our faith and the way in which we're brought up, we're pushed to assist others. And I think that the messages that kept coming throughout the time of lockdown, that keep safe, stay at home if you don't need to leave, and if you're not a key worker, but at the same time, keep an eye on your neighbors, keep an eye on those in need, and make sure that you donate to the charitable causes and the such. And therefore, the contribution and the work of the Muslim community actually throughout the month of Ramadan was quite significant on a virtual level. Yes, there was little or a fraction of the usual income that we expect as charities, as Muslim organizations, as Islamic centers and mosques and the like, but still the movement was quite significant. And also the reaching out to the rest of community. How some of the mosques, for instance, they remained open, providing food banks for the poor, providing shelter for the homeless, providing counsel centers for those in need of help, assistance, of counseling, and all sorts of services that are almost invisible in normal circumstances. So the way in which the Muslim community leapt into operation is something that is quite admirable, I would say, and something that we can build on, hopefully, when we come to reopen our Islamic centers and mosques, because now every single Islamic center realizes that its work is not only to provide a prayer space for Muslims, but also to provide a community service for Muslims as well as non-Muslims living within its neighborhood. I'd like to finish on the international reach. You know that as Muslim communities, they all feel either ethnically, nationally, or from the religious perspective as being part of a bigger entity. We all feel, for instance, I hail from Iraq. I have family in Iraq, and there are issues with Iraq. We are all Muslims, and therefore we feel that we are part of this construct, this ummah, if you wish. In France, for instance, you have the North African communities that also have family and concerns and the such. This kind of relationship also was extremely important. Many people couldn't travel at times when they usually would travel to meet their families, and also the kind of exchange of goods during the month of Ramadan and the such, because of the infection, couldn't take place. But I would like to highlight that the concern for the issues on a political level, on a human rights level, on a freedoms and equality and the such level was extremely important. And therefore, one of the greatest debates that came out on social space and social platforms was the issue of democracy and human rights and oppression at times of COVID, and how some oppressive regimes, for instance, utilized this time or took advantage of this time in order to be more oppressive and more closing down of media rights, of freedoms and the such. So this is something that was fairly interesting.
Well, thank you very much. I think you touched on very critical issues, especially the impact of coronavirus on democracy, human rights, liberalism, free market economy, and transportation and travel of people. I think these are all interrupted, or some kind of a negative impact that can be observed on all these, I think, issues. Now, going back to Germany again, Bülent, you have an organization, you are the president of an organization which has branches almost all over Europe. So you have got input from other countries as well. From your perspective, how well prepared Muslims were in the time of such crisis, whether they were, organized very effectively or not? Because what we have seen in this crisis, I think we need strong welfare states, because there are some vulnerable communities, there are minorities and refugees, people do not have equal opportunity. And in times of crisis, we also see that the services provided by the state is not sufficient. We need some extra services and, I think, assistance. That comes from civil society organizations like yourself, like your organizations. Can you just give us some specific examples of what your organizations or similar Muslim society, civil society organizations have come up with in order to help the state and the society to cope with the impact of virus?
Okay, thank you. Yes, the first thing what we did, it was immediately gave our organization the order. We are now organized worldwide, especially in Europe, but worldwide as well. We gave the order to our branches to stop their activities, programs with audiences. This was what we did at first. And after that, we thought about, okay, we can't make programs, activities with people. So what can we do? We need to take responsibility and show us our solidarity. These things were what we firstly think about. Then we said, okay, the people are in trouble. How can we support them? How can we help them? The first thing what we did was, after giving our branches to stop their activities, was to create a hotline. So with this hotline, people could contact us and they could tell us what if they have problems, how we can support them. The first question was, I'm currently in Turkey. How can I come through or back again to Germany or to Belgium or to France or to Austria? No matter. So the first thing was that, how can we go back to our home? And the other way around was also the case. The people were in Europe and they said, okay, we can't go back to Turkey. How we can reach Turkey back again? So in both directions, we had people. They asked us how they can go to the country where they want to go, and this is the first thing. But during the phase, the questions. Let me please say add one thing to the hotline. Why we created the hotline? The first thing was to take responsibility, to show our solidarity, to help, and the second thing is we had very in a big amount in the social media or in the news, fake news. So we thought, okay, we need to give the people with our hotline safe and right news. This was another thing what we thought about. And then during the phase, the people asked us other questions. Then we got questions regarding, okay, my family member died, unfortunately, and how we can transport them to Turkey. Or in the further phase, we saw people, they asked us for help because they couldn't get good health care in the country where they live. It was a problem in France, all we know, especially also in Sweden. People asked us to reach politicians in Turkey. How can go they through to Turkey? So we asked people in Turkey, ministers, that there are some problems, and the Turkish government sent airplanes, ambulance airplanes, to these countries and picked people with Turkish origin up because they thought, okay, they haven't got any good health care in this country. So as you mentioned, Turkey did as well a very good job. Of obviously problems and issues you have it in every country, but regarding this, Turkey did a very good job regarding its diaspora. If there was the need, the Turkish government sent an ambulance airplane and picked up his citizen. This was also a good thing. And again, back to the NGO perspective, we thought, okay, what can we do? A further thing, what can we do? Not only a hotline. So we try to, as you know, in the first phase or in the beginning of this COVID phase, you couldn't get any masks, any medical equipment. So we tried to organize medical equipment or masks to provide it with the people, regardless which origin. So we thought, okay, we can't get masks for money. You could give money, but you couldn't get the masks. So then we thought, okay, we need to produce masks by ourselves. Our branches worldwide started to produce masks and provided it with the people, and also with sanitaries. And the people took risk, as Mr. Tikriti said. They said, okay, it is not easy to take responsibility in such situations. And I think the Muslims in Europe, they took really responsibility. They show their solidarity, but this contains risk for themselves, for their health as well. So we saw this situation across Europe and also in the world, that especially the Muslim people, they took care about their neighbors, and also they tried to support the governments where they live.
Well, thank you, Bülent. I think you have really succinctly summarized the role of the civil society organizations as an additional support to the society, because the states, as I have said, because of the enormous volume of the infection, they were not able to deliver everything that is needed by the citizens. Here, what we have seen in the case of Germany and in the case of your organization and in the case of many Muslim, I think, civil society organizations, I think they came up with some responsibility, because they were criticized by many, I think, politicians, intellectuals before. They were not well integrated. They were not in absorbing the values of the European societies. I think what we have seen in this crisis is that Muslims in Europe have shown that they were responsible citizens, and also they were absorbing the values of the society, like democracy, civil society, taking responsibility, looking after each other. I think these are all important developments that we have seen, and sometimes we look at the Muslims with cliches. I think all these cliches are now deconstructed by the actions and activities of civil society organizations. I think now we can...
May I add one thing, please, Professor?
Sure.
It is important to say that. At first, I don't want to say it, but if sometimes we need to say such things openly. We, as Union of International Democrats, as UID, contacted all directors of Red Crescent in whole Europe, and only from Italy we got a positive feedback. We said to them, okay, we can support Red Crescent. However, what you need, we can support. We want to support. Only from Italy we got a positive feedback. And from other countries, unfortunately, we got a refusion. Sometimes no answer. So this was not a good situation. But however, we said, okay, we need to be active. We need to be proactive. So it was no problem for us. We started the things what we have done, and it was okay.
You know, Bülent, we are going through a crisis time. I think some of the organizations, some of the institutions have also failed, as you have just mentioned. I think now there is a lot of criticism. There is a lot of questioning of the functions of all these organizations, locally, regionally, and also, globally. I think we will continue to question their activities, their policies. This is the right for every individual and for communities. Now, I would like to come back to France again, because Mr. Toumi raised a number of important questions, but because of the time restraints, he was not able to address all these issues. Now, Mr. Toumi, you can just continue from where you have left. You can look at the impact and the responses of the Muslim communities in all areas. As we have seen, there is a huge impact on Muslims, and in some areas we are well prepared, but in some areas we are not well prepared. For example, what is the psychological impact on the Muslim youth, Muslim women, whether there are counseling opportunities in such crises, because people cannot go to hospitals or the doctors as easily as they were before. Okay, the floor is yours, Mr. Toumi.
Thank you very much. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, and with this kind of important question is that how they are, the Muslim community is coping with the pandemic. Actually, it went well to some extent. And as one of my colleagues mentioned, I think Bülent about responsibility, they were responsible. And the Muslim community leadership, despite its disunion, but on this matter, they acted and they reacted very, very, very well. So, and they applied all the lockdown measures that were installed by the government, and it was kind of a very, very tightened solidarity. They succeed even to weave an important webs within the community between the families and all the this generation and intergeneration. They were checking on each other, and also since it was also mentioned by Cakar Hanem on the Ramadan issue and its effect, let's say, divinely, psychologically, and socially. And also, it was, despite its the toughness and the difficulties for not being active during Ramadan, as we all know, it's our best activity in the year. But this time, they also being or acted responsibly, so going through checking on the needy, and they started a kind of distribution of foods and clothing and checking on all the families. And also, it's very important to mention here about the Muslim community in France. There is this cliche on the national media and to some within the politicians. When we speak about Muslim community, we speak about the periphery, like they call it in French, la banlieue, as it's a pejorative term, which means is the hub of violence, delinquency, and security, etc. On the other hand, it's the hub of the hard working class, because the majority with them and their parents, they came in the 60s and 70s, but that for French, at that time, government policies, they built this social housing. But it turned out to be successful stories. They came out from this, meaning by this, the children of these parents who worked very hard dealing with integration, language barrier, etc. They didn't give only Zidane and Benzema, because when we speak about integration, post-integration, okay, we have Zidane, we have Benzema, eventually Mbappe. No, we have doctors, we have engineers, we have lawyers, etc. And on the doctor side, there are many doctors and nurses working very, very hard, and they were in the front line during this crisis. And just just to have like a number here, there are more than 4,000 Algerian doctors who are working in French medical field. And also there are Moroccans, Tunisians, and other nationalities, even other nationalities from the Sahelian countries, in Mali, in Senegal. Just for anecdotally speaking, during the crisis, when Macron made his visit in Marseille, visiting the hospital or the service of, let's say, the controversial doctor Didier Raoult, and when he started, he just, I don't know, innocently asked one of his students and these PhD program students who were in the room, where are you from? So one is, okay, I'm from Lebanon, you are from Algeria, you are from Morocco, you are from Mali. So all this, it's positive image. It's actually, it's helpful image for the integration and the post-integration process. To be fair also, when we speak about the Muslim community, it's not only bad things came out from these, let's say, tough neighborhoods. There are very, very positive and very good stories. So people are acting within the community at their level, locally. So they are, it's not focused on the charity aspect. They are getting into politics. They are running for office. locally. So, I mean, we are on the eve of the second round of the French municipality elections. So all these good stories will change not only the dynamic, but the course of the immigrants. Because the children, they don't see them immigrants. They are part of this country, and they are well integrated, and they know what's going on. There is just one thing is missing, and maybe I will leave it to the final point in terms of leadership and what are the prospect of this. So there is this kind of mistrust in public life, meaning by this, in terms of civil society, joining civil society that will lead to a political process, or even including the other aspects, let's say, in terms of education, in terms of culture, in terms of, and that will lead to socioeconomic aspects. On the other hand, during the crisis, so people, they were worried, and the majority of them, the middle class or hard working people who have kind of a decent income, they were worried about their short or near future. So because they were staying at home for 2 months, some of them, they weren't sure whether or not they're going to get a full salary, 80% of their salary, or even are they going to go back to work? So, but there is now, since the last 2 weeks, and especially this week, there is full lockdown is in here in France, and it looks like life is getting back to normal, but people are still a little bit anxious economically and socially. So that when we speak about people here, it's not only the Muslim communities or only the minorities. All the French people are concerned about this element. Also, there was an interesting point here. It's that what I mentioned earlier. There is this intergeneration issue. The Muslim community of families, this is, let's say, privately speaking. So some, again, unfortunately, they had some losses who passed during the crisis, rahimahumullah. So as we know, so culturally here, all of us, myself is concerned, we want to be buried in our land, in our native countries. So it was an issue here during the lockdown time, and people, they were very, very anxious about the burial, I'd say, ritual aspect. So some of them, they were calling some mosque, some Muslim community leaders about the, the washing, the ghusl. So because there were some, like, let's say, maybe fake news misspread, like they are not washing them, they're just, burying them directly. So it was kind of, it played out psychologically in a bad way on the mentality of some in this among these families. But it turned out to not be true, and people and the leader of the community so showed their responsibility again, and they ensured all these families so that everything was going well and will be buried according to our Muslim and Islamic rituals. So this, I think, it's another positive image for the leadership of the community. So let's say just 2-3 months ago, they weren't as serious about this, because 3 months ago, there were local elections, as I mentioned. So the French were.
Mr. Toumi, can we discuss election issues, political participation in the next round? Because there are some also questions coming from the viewers.
Perfectly.
Maybe we can combine them together and try to respond to them. Because, as you have just said, Muslims are well integrated in education, in different professions. And of course, one aspect of is political participation in Europe. I think, if you allow me, I would like to turn to Dalya. Sure. We can, in the third round, we can explore all these political issues, the leadership issues as well. Dalya, thank you very much for your patience because you have waited long. Now, we are curious about your findings, actually. You have said that you did some field research, and because I think this is one of the first research findings that I will hear, at least. Okay. It will be an excellent opportunity for us to have your, I think, interpretation of the data.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I actually wanted to present this in the third part of my speech, but if you want, I can do it right now.
We can wait, but if okay. That's fine. I think if we should go according to your plan, then we can maybe concentrate on again NGO issue, gender issue, what you have done during the coronavirus issue. Some of the projects maybe that you have implemented in the field, and what kind of relations you had with the state, with the local agencies, with the bureaucracy, because I think all NGOs and civil society organizations have really greatly contributed to the work of the governments all over the world.
Yes, that's right. This is really very, very important because the economic impact of the coronavirus will be huge in every country. But nevertheless, I think the big losers of this crisis will be the poorer countries like in the Middle East or Afghanistan, in Africa, because they are anyway suffering right now. Plus, the prices for food has increased really a lot. So therefore, our contribution was really amazing. This is just, as I told you before, first we had the shock that people are not going to allowed to go out and stay at home. But later on, they realized that the social distancing, what we have to practice, is anyway a form of Ramadan itself. So not eating in public because the restaurants are closed anyway, not being able to celebrate because clubs and I don't know whatever, no weddings were allowed. And things like this, it was anyway some kind of Ramadan. The only grave difference was, of course, unfortunately, that the mosques were closed. So nevertheless, the behavior of donating during Ramadan, it was the same, but not only the same, it was even more. Because we had anyway planned a Ramadan campaign for the countries Afghanistan and northern Syria. Our members and donators are mainly women who are living in Germany. They are mostly from Turkey, Afghanistan, and also Bangladesh. Because of the limitations and also the restrictions on our usual businesses, because we are not doing this it's not our main, I don't want to say job, but main activity, because every one of us has its own business or profession normally. But because of the lockdown and the limitations, we were able to focus 100% of the charity campaigns. So this was the first positive impact of the pandemic, because if there is no one who reaches the people, who contacts them, who makes all the campaigns, of course, also the people will not be able to donate. So we use this extraordinary situation to draw the attention of the communities to the crisis areas in order to show them also, to make some kind of empathy, in order to show them how privileged we are, even in this situation, because no one here had to suffer from any shortage, not food, no money or whatever, because the help of the government, especially the German government, the financial support was really huge, as Mr. Bilgi also mentioned before. But nevertheless, even because of the uncontrolled behavior or uncontrolled shopping behavior of some people, we had problems, for example, to get some special kinds of foods because many people stocked at home. So we had the money in our pocket, but we were not able to buy. So, but there are people, for example, this is what we have communicated to our community. There are people who, even in normal times, have the problems to buy or to afford food, who suffer from hunger all the time. So this perception helped our people here to deal better with this lockdown situation and its negative impacts. It was really amazing, as we have really not expected such a big contribution. As a result, we have only in Afghanistan distributed 15.65 tons of food, only in Afghanistan. With the distribution in northern Syria, it came up to almost 20 tons. As you asked before, what was, we have, of course, as an NGO, we are working with a local NGO, but nevertheless, we have received thanks letter from the governor of Küçükcan, because he said, thanks for these people because they do what we normally have to do. So the food prices increased. There is also, of course, always the problem with the security reaching the people. And what was also a negative impact is that anyway, during Ramadan, NGOs from Turkey or Europe or other countries travel or go to these countries to crisis areas in order to help and distribute food and food packages or whatever. But because of the lockdown, less help reached these people. So therefore, it was some kind of time of consciousness for our people here, because they saw the pandemic makes no difference between a rich and poor. A wealthy European businessman in Europe is in the same situation as a poor street worker, for example, in Afghanistan, because they are both facing the same danger, the coronavirus, and they both have to stay at home and are not able to work. But the difference is that the European part gets support from the government or also has its own backup and whatever. But for people in Afghanistan, staying at home is not a choice at all, because they have to maybe go out for $1 a day to earn money for themselves and for their families. But because of the lockdown, even this was not possible. So we realized that the virus is not, or to say hunger and starvation became a bigger problem for them than the virus. As many people said, not the virus will kill us, but hunger. So it was important for us also to let our donors know where this wealth, what we are getting here, comes from. As we are all living in Europe, and every European country has somehow a colonization history or is in a leading position in weapon exports to the Middle East or other countries or Near East or Africa. So we communicated to our people that they really should know that for the money, what they get as a support for themselves, for their families, for their business, maybe 10 people or 10 kids in Afghanistan become orphans or in another country. So during the Ramadan and the lockdown situation, everyone had really a lot of time to think about this. And yes, also the result was really amazing. We organized online meetings. Of course, we were not able to gather, but we organized online meetings. We distributed newsletters. We shared photos and videos from the crisis areas to enlighten the people about the situation. And here I also want to emphasize, many people said, oh, why are you helping people who are thousands of kilometers away? First, you have to help your nearest ones. What I say and what is my state of opinion is, of course, we first checked if any help here is needed. But we have really, in Europe, nor in Turkey, no one is suffering from hunger. Plus, as Mr. Bilgi also said before, I have to confirm this, the Turkish and Muslim NGOs in Germany were very active. They took the responsibility for themselves, not only for the Muslims, but for the neighborhood, for the Christian, and also even for churches. So we saw there is no need actually to help here. So we therefore concentrated on the crisis areas. The other thing is we are living in the internet era. We are living in an era of digitalization. So we cannot say this is far away because look, you are sitting in Turkey, you are sitting in Belgium, and we are now having an online panel together. So if someone in Germany can help while being in lockdown, you know, so this is very important, while being in a quarantine. If someone in Germany, while being in quarantine, can help a child in Afghanistan without even leaving his home, and then he even gets the results of his help by photo or video material, we cannot talk about distances anymore. So I think this issue should be closed forever. So as a result of the COVID, we can say and we can summarize that the willingness to donate became really amazingly huge. 15.65 tons of food Afghanistan, thousands of euros of cash money like zakat and fitra and so on. With the food distribution in northern Syria, we distributed almost 20 tons of food. So we made a little survey within our donors in order to conclude how the pandemic affected their behavior of donating. The result is really touching because the huge majority stated that they have donated more than the farz donations, which is obligatory by Islam, by our belief, like zakat and fitra and fidya. because of the lockdown, they stated that there was less opportunity to them to spend money. Of course, we had all less income because of our business restrictions and so on, but we also had less opportunities to spend money. I, for myself, normally I'm a tourism professional. I didn't travel anywhere. So there were, for example, no costs for flight and I don't know, car and whatever, because everyone was sitting at home. Plus, no restaurants to eat outside. Because of the restrictions on gathering, we were not able to have guests at home during Ramadan. If you just imagine as an example, if we, for example, invite another family for iftar at home, it would minimum cost $100, for example. But this was not possible. So we advised...
Dalya, maybe we can just have some kind of rethinking here on, because these are too much details. These are very relevant, but I think you have proven that coronavirus has also some positive impact on the charity behavior of people. I think this is a very good example, and I would encourage you to publish all these results because this is a success story in a sense. It's a good example that people should look at it. Okay, if you allow me, I would like to move on to London again, because we are now coming towards the last, I think, section of our panel. So you will again have 5 or 6 minutes in the end to have some more reflections on the research as well. Now, coming back to you, Anas Tikriti in London. So you talked about the successes and failures, and also you talked about the risks waiting for the European Union. Although I think Britain is not part of the European Union, but still there are very close relationships in many ways, in research, in economy, in trade, in finance, in technology, etc. How would you see the future of Europe in general, European civilization, European democracy, European dealing with the minorities, etc.? Because the coronavirus, as you have said, have opened some windows for people, especially for those who are less democratic or who are trying to close the doors for foreigners and for immigrants. I think now we should look at this aspect as well. What we should expect in the future, especially in the near future, as far as the impact of coronavirus is concerned, and also what are the tasks for us as Muslim communities in Europe to overcome the crises and challenges? The floor is yours.
I think that's those are quite important questions, and I'll start with.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there is also a question to you by the viewers. One question is the following. They say, as you have said, the mosques and many Muslim charities were hit because of the virus. He is asking our viewer whether there are any funds and schemes in order to help the mosques, because mosques are the main centers for Muslim communities. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So there are 3 things that I'll try to respond to. The first is the point that you ended up with Professor Talip, and that is in respect to we need to pay attention to the fact that we are now in a very, very fluid situation, and that the outcome post-COVID could be entirely different from how we were 3 months ago. In terms of the main pillars of politics, in terms of the norms of reaction, in terms of how we respond. One of the things that occurred to me as I was listening to my colleagues is that it is quite fascinating, the fact that now we have a world in which oil prices have reached rock bottom, and we got to a stage, if you all recall, where producers were actually paying transport trucks to take the petrol from them because it was in the negative. We live in a world where at one stage the most important and most valuable commodity became the face mask, and whoever possessed the face mask could actually exert more diplomatic impact and influence on others because of that. And therefore, if even the scale of power, the balance of power in the world shifted and changed quite dramatically. Whilst before it was whoever possessed economic power, whoever had the biggest multinationals, whoever had the biggest weaponry and military arsenal around the world, all of a sudden it became who could provide PPEs, the protection equipment, who can have the face masks, who was more advanced in terms of their research for finding a vaccine or a treatment for corona. So, for instance, I would suggest that amongst the top 2 or 3 countries in terms of the balance of power during the COVID era was Turkey. Turkey all of a sudden became a supplier to countries such as the United Kingdom and such as the United States of America, providing them with assistance, with almost charitable donations in order to fight their own fight. So the whole balance of power shifted, and that will have a telling impact on everything, on geopolitics, on how diplomacy is played out, and how policy emerges. And that's something that we need to pay attention to. The question that I believe that Dr. Amr Darrag mentions is quite important. And I gave the example of the economic challenges facing Islamic centers and how that will probably impact the economic agility of Muslim communities throughout Europe as an example. But there are many, many issues that we can also talk about. What is the common answer to all of this is that we are in a stage whereby we need more and more creative ideas as to how to resolve these issues. We are now confronted by an array of challenges which before we didn't have. So all of a sudden, we are now demanded, the most precious assets that we have is ideas. New ideas, genuine ideas, original ideas. And this is something that now, Muslim and non-Muslim youngsters are now finding a space for them to come up with these ideas in order to resolve and to challenge these issues. We're seeing across the board, and including Muslims. I myself, throughout the month of Ramadan, took part in more than 12 or 13 events that were to raise funds for local as well as international concepts, and all of them were very, very successful. So the call is for new ideas. The call is to realize that we are in a new space, that this is now a new game, and there are new rules, and that means we can have new players. In the past, probably people saw that it was absolutely closed and the big players were the only one allowed in the game. Now it's a different scene, and we need to call for that. We need to tell people that now is the time for you to come up with your new ideas, genuine ideas, to solve this issue, the economic one, as well as many others. I'll finish with this. The impact of Europe around the world is extremely important for several reasons. Firstly, because it creates that kind of balance between the United States and between Russia and China. The second is because of the geographical location. And Bülent Bey mentioned the issues of refugees and the such. And there is no doubt that the straddling of East and West in Europe and its close proximity to Turkey from East, as well as North Africa from South, is something which will remain an incredible importance. And therefore, Europe in itself, which I personally think faces the immense challenge of staying together, not only because of Brexit, but more greatly because it failed, generally speaking, to provide a cohesive strategy throughout all its member states about how to deal with the COVID virus. So we saw a total lockdown in several countries. We saw a sort of semi-lockdown in some countries, and we saw countries like Sweden leave life to be totally open and invite herd immunity. So this lack of a cohesive policy and strategy, I believe, weakened the resolve and the validity of the European Union. Also, the fact that certain countries made it absolutely clear in even non-diplomatic terms how they were totally angered by the failure of the EU to provide them with the basic assistance and help to help them survive, such as what the Italian government did, what the Serbian president said, in terms of the EU turned out to be some wishful dream, but nothing in reality. And the Serbian president saying we only have one friend, and that is the Chinese prime minister. It's Italy saying that we thank Turkey and we thank China for the help that they provided, but no one else helped us. all this, I believe, weakens the integrity of the European Union. On a global stage, that will have a deep, deep impact. And that, I believe, will be detrimental to all of us. It is important, it is imperative that the European Union, especially on a non-governmental level, because that is where the European Union excels, on an NGO level, it is imperative that it continues to play that role. The European Union was one of the major players in, let's say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If that role is totally disappeared, now it has been undermined because of Trump, but if it totally disappears, I believe that will be to the detriment of those willing for a just outcome. So we have all these issues, we have these challenges ahead of us, but mostly, and I would like to leave on this note, there is great optimism to be had. We can speak for hours about the failures, about the difficulties, about the challenges, about the negatives, and all those may be valid. But it's absolutely crucial that we realize we are emerging into probably a new world, which means a new set of rules for the game, which means it is open for new players and new ideas, and that is where we come into this.
Well, thank you for such kind of optimism, Anas. I think I partly agree with you, because the European Union has been very much criticized for being quite silent on many issues internationally. And in the recent, of course, crisis, also we have seen that there was not a cohesive plan of action by the European Union. I think it's time that the European Union itself, assesses its own position in many, many areas. Now, I think you have said you are optimistic because this crisis has also opened some new windows of opportunity, for new actors, for new players. Yes, Turkey has helped many countries. I think more than 75 countries received some kind of medical equipment from Turkey. This is something positive. Now, I would like to ask Bülent whether this opportunity is present in Europe in general and in Germany in particular, because now what we have seen that the rise of NGOs is a fact. And it seems that this crisis will continue for some time. There is no end. There is no, at least in the short term. Education will be disrupted, the elderly issues, looking after the elderly, and also employment issues. I think we will see the impact of that crisis for some time to come. And how do you think Muslim communities are, whether Muslim communities can see it as a window of opportunity to exert themselves in the social, political, and economic fields in Europe? This is one question. There are two other questions for you. Maybe you should also touch on them. One question is whether Turks and Muslims in Germany will be influenced in terms of their political participation, whether this coronavirus will motivate them to be more politically active. This is one question. The second question is, I think also Dalya can answer these questions too, whether a good management of the pandemic process by the government might prevent the rise of far-right groups in Germany, because this is also a fact that those groups can sometimes creep in and then they try to exert their influence on politics in times of crisis. Bülent, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Firstly, I need to say I fully agree with Mr. Tikriti. I need to underline everything what he said. We are entering a new era in every sector. So therefore, we need new ideas and new players. I fully agree, and it's not necessary to repeat everything. So I think in the same direction. But let me please tell something about the future of the EU. I think it is important. In the EU, during this COVID process, we saw a clear lack of solidarity. The COVID-19 phase was a stress test for the EU, like a stress test for the banks. And unfortunately, we can say that the EU couldn't pass this period not very well. It's clear. We saw things in Italy, in Serbia as well, in other countries in Europe. So it was a bad situation for the whole EU and whole Europe. So therefore, this shows us also what we said at the beginning, that a new era is entering. So I'm also optimistic, like Mr. Tikriti. So as I said, I would fully underline what he said, because the stress test, which couldn't be passed very well by the EU, nobody from the I mean the governments in the EU. It was a new situation for the governments. They couldn't react very well. I don't think that they don't want to help. They don't want to take responsibility. I think they couldn't realize and they couldn't understand the situation, and they had no receipt how to deal with this situation. This was the shock situation for the countries, and therefore all countries, they cooked their own meal, how we in German say. Every country cooked his own meal, and okay, we will see how it affects. This shows us the clear picture about EU and the European Union, and also that we enter a new phase, as we said before. So and we see two fractions in the EU. So on the one hand, we see the South Europe countries with Italy, with Spain, and partly France, and the north part of Europe, like Netherlands or Austria. It's a little bit in south, but mentally, we see two fractions, and I think the German government or Germany is between the two fractions and tries to keep the balance. The South countries say, okay, you need to support us, you need to help us, and the other countries, the north part of Europe, like Netherlands and Austria, as I said before, they are a little bit, they said, okay, we need to be careful. So in terms of support in a financial way. So this is a new situation for the EU, and from my point of view, it is we say in Germany 5 minutes to 12. So EU needs to restructure itself and needs to reorganize itself. Otherwise, he will pass the window of opportunity. This is my point of view. And the question what you mentioned regarding the political participation of people from Turkey. Unfortunately, we need to say that the political participation of people with origin of Turkey, it is not very well. So there are people in politics with Turkish origin, but they have no links to the Turkish society. It's open to say. We need to say it. They have Turkish name, and that was, and they have no links and no links to the Turkish community. It needs to be said. And we as NGOs, we need to increase the interest, or we need to draw the people's interest to politics in the new future. Not only they are interested in politics, but they are interested in politics in Turkey, not in the politics in the country where they live. This is the main issue, I think, and they should interest in politics in Turkey, but they also should about politics in the country where they live. This is important, and we as UID, we will increase our efforts in that direction. That's for sure. We did that in the past, and we will increase and accelerate that in the future as well. So unfortunately, we are weak in this floor. But the second question was, when I remember correct, you said when the government leads this pandemic process in a proper way, can we stop the rise of the far-right AfD? Unfortunately, we can say that the German government deals the situation in a proper way, and other countries as well, like in Austria. But despite of this, the rise of AFD is still going on. We saw protesters in rallies in many cities in Germany, and the AFD, the far-right groups, they are taking part at these rallies. So currently, the German government deals good with the process, but the far-right guys are within the protesters, and they try to put themselves in this process. What we need to do is that we need to focus the interest of the people, of the Muslims in Germany, to draw their attention to the politics in that country where they live.
Thank you very much, Bülent. As I understand, of maybe Muslim civil society organizations during the post-coronavirus period is to raise political consciousness among the Muslim communities, so that they can participate, they can become part of local elections, national elections, and on the European level as well. I think this is something waiting for us. That's what we should expect from the Muslim communities. Now I am again going back to Paris, going back to France, where Mr. Toumi was talking about the leadership issues. And there is a question which is raised by one of the viewers. He is saying that whether this coronavirus is impacting Muslims living in Europe to return to their own countries because of the failures of the government, or because of the severity of the problem and the challenges ahead. Because I think all speakers have pointed out that one of the concerns is the ambiguity. We don't know what's going to happen in the future in terms of jobs, in terms of education, in terms of social cohesion, etc. Maybe Mr. Toumi, you can also address such issues in your last intervention, because we are running out of time. We are coming to the end of our panel. Please go ahead with such issues, and also the leadership, the relations between the diaspora communities and the countries of origin in this critical time. Floor is yours, Mr. Toumi. I think he is.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you right now. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, but I just want to add what have been said by my dearest friends and brothers regarding this issue of this pandemic crisis, and we are already speaking about post-corona. I think we are still dealing with corona, but the question is, we have to be optimistic, and we have to look at this difficult time and experience that the entire humanity went through during the last 2 or 3 months, and notably our community. I think, of course, as we mentioned earlier, and going all the way to the title, that Muslims are not united, and they are not homogeneous, and we have many communities, we don't have one community. I think the lesson we learned from this pandemic, we have to be one community. And the leaders, locally speaking, of our community has to take this opportunity and look for solutions and offer or propose perspectives, and also be active within their community. It's very important, I have to mention this, and when I said people are, especially the youth, are interested in public life and want to be active in their adoptive or born countries. There is one important point that Bülent mentioned. Unfortunately, the non-African, the North African community, let's say politicians, are like the Turks, are not looking toward their community as soon as they get into let's say, get close to the establishment. So there is this disconnection, even though some of them, they made it through starting with their community. Just a small example here. Again, there is a runoff in the city of Paris by the end of the month. And interesting, there is a candidate, her name is Rachida Dati, with more Algerian Moroccan background. She's running for the city hall of Paris. But the people here, or the youth, actually, I mean, both genders, they don't identify themselves with her story, because they see her disconnected from them. Now, actually, to some extent, it is, again, we can argue about that, but it's not, maybe in different context, inshallah, and in better health circumstances. For the question of, do the Muslim community population are looking for an alternative solution, which means to cross south, going back to their native countries, it's a huge challenge, and also it's still a 1 million question. Why? Because, again, unfortunately, especially the North African countries are not that stable, politically, economically, socially. So maybe there is some hope that there is something going on positive coming out from these countries, like I believe the Tunisian story. It's bright, and it's given some hope and a ray of hope for the population. The Algerian political transition or peaceful transition is one of them. The Moroccan stability is also. But when I'm not excluding Libya, because we don't have a large Libyan community here in France. I'm sure there are many of them are in Britain, etc. But so this is why the future of this community, or the member of this community, is in their adoptive and born countries. Whereas the origin country, it's still a reference. How they are looking, and this, especially the youth, well educated, they are looking at their native, the country of their parents, as, again, a reference to go help, what I can do, how I can help. So this is why there are some, especially the young generation here, so they are already building some startups in Algeria, for instance. So because now of the new government, the new administration in Algeria is in kind of, let's say, opening a small window toward freedom and fiscal ease. So people are thinking to go and do business, but doesn't mean they are moving to stay there. So they will be, let's say, keeping their foot here and another foot in Algeria, for instance. So this is why the integration and the post-integration element is crucial. On the other hand, the origin countries, the leadership out there in Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco, eventually Libya, they have to establish kind of a strategic public policy toward those who are in here. So it doesn't mean you have to appoint just, let's say, a minister with Minister of Immigration and Community Abroad. No, it has to be efficient policies. It has to be strategy. So how to connect between their adoptive and born countries and their origin country. So all this, so this is why, again, we have to look at the Turkish model. It's very important. What Turkey has been doing lately is it's very, very interesting. So Turkey is dealing with its citizens with immigrant descent as if they were nationals. There is no distinction. So they are not looking at the Turkish who is in Ankara or in Istanbul differently than the one who is in Bonn or in Brussels. So they are equally treated. So, and it's a good strategy that the government in North Africa or in the Maghreb countries, they have to look at it because it is crucial for their stability. On the other hand, it's crucial for France here, national security, because when we speak about this, we speak also about the illegal immigration who are crossing north, so coming from Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, crossing to Spain.
Well, I think that's an issue which a different panel, the migration issue. But you have touched on really critical, I think, points. Toumi, thank you very much indeed for your intervention. Now we are going back to Germany again, to Dalya, because she has some original data to share with us. But before what she is going to talk about the research finding, I would like to ask her whether she is also optimistic, because 3 speakers said that they are optimistic about the future, not pessimistic, and they have explained the reasons why they are optimistic. What is your position on that, about the future of the minority communities or the Muslim communities, Dalya, in Germany and elsewhere, whether there is a new opportunity for the emergence of a better, let's say, policies or representation in a sense or not, and what are the reasons behind your, let's say, position? And then after briefly explaining your optimism or your pessimism, then you can move on to presenting the data. But I would request you to remain within 6-7 minutes, then we need to wrap up. Thank you.
So first of all, of course, I have to confirm that I'm also positive. I was always positive and I'm staying positive. I will also be positive in the future. The reason is just, it lies in our religion. We are Muslims, alhamdulillah, and in our religion, there is no place for pessimism. We all know the hadith of the Prophet, tie the camel, trust in Allah. So we all have to tie our camels. So we have to take all the measures, what is needed in order to stay optimistic. So therefore, I think most of the Muslim communities in Europe will also follow the same way. Further, I would like to say that I agree to Mr. Bilgi regarding the political participation of the Turkish community in Germany, because in this extraordinary situation, we saw that in the worst case, we are sharing the destiny of the country or of the area where we are living. Normally, many of the people have very, very close connections to the country of origin where they come from, for example, Turkey. They are following the Turkish news, they're mentally completely Turkish, what is not a problem normally at all. But now, during the pandemic, we saw that this connection was cut and it can be cut on every time again. So therefore, we have to find ways to cooperate more with the German NGOs or also with the German government. Of course, it is not a one-sided way, as Mr. Bilgi said, as an example. For example, also the German part has to be ready for cooperation. But also for the Turkish part, we have to find ways, or Muslim part, ways and solutions, how we can stay connected if such a pandemic should repeat again in the future, because there will maybe again be the situation that we are in a lockdown here and we are sharing the destiny of the geography where we are living. So this is one thing. And now I would like to come to the results of our research. One, I have already mentioned in my previous part. The majority of our donators stated that they donated more than they usually do and more than what is forced by religion. A further gratifying result is that most of the people said that they will keep this, that they will keep this increased willingness for donation even after the pandemic hopefully ends. So we are receiving huge support for our running projects, for house building, orphans, and so on. So other results is, many of them said, I'm sorry, I have to read because I received the results in the morning. Ramadan relieved the pressure of the pandemic on the Muslim community. It was somehow a salvation for them. The empathy and also shukr increased a lot. Mosques were closed. This is, of course, not nice, but the families enjoyed practicing their prayers together at home. Plus, understanding for the people in refugee camps and appreciation of freedom of movement increased. Also, another important result is online and TV Ramadan programs were somehow even more enjoyable than in the mosques because of less noise. The mostly elderly people stated this. So maybe the mosque associations could keep this for the future, or at least give this alternative for them, because for the elderly people, sometimes maybe it is problematic to go to the mosque or to be within the noise. Another result is that the intention of many of the people have the intention of a more conscious life after COVID-19. Plus, there is also a completely new page what we should open after this pandemic, especially as Muslims. Many of the people stated that they had a need for spiritual care. In Germany, for example, there is a special education for this, also in other European countries. Some imams, for example, from mosques, they make a special education, but it is not the complete one. We knew, for example, hundreds of Muslims lost their lives because of the COVID-19, and they were under quarantine. They had to die alone without any mental support. But this is really needed not only for the ill people, but also for their family members. So maybe the mosques or the governments could focus on this after this pandemic, to make a new education as a spiritual carer, also in Turkish called manevi rehber, because in such extraordinary situations, the need of the people is really amazingly high, and it also should be responded for from the people or from the institutions who are responsible for this. So this is my side. I would like to add nothing more. Oh yes, regarding the racism, there is really it's a huge task on the German government, because we see that the racism is high, and these groups are using this pandemic in order to spread their propaganda. So there, the institutions have to be really very, very careful who is protesting against COVID and who is hiding his racist intention by protesting against COVID-19. So I think the government could somehow build opportunities for Muslim and non-Muslim associations and NGOs in order to cooperate. And also it should be, this is very important, we see that the Muslim NGOs did really a great job, a huge job, Muslim, Turkish, whatever, but the problem was that it was not mentioned in German media. So this is actually a point what I have missed from the German side, and what I would say is very important in order also to reduce the racism, or at least prejudices against Muslim groups.
Well, I think, thank you. This is, for us, very original data, and that should be shared not only with the media, but also with the think tanks and academic community, and also policy makers. Because you have pointed out that, you know, people on the ground, because you have worked with many people, and also one of the results I think is important, religious and spiritual counseling.
Yes.
This is happening in many Western settings. Many churches in Europe, they are providing it for the believers of Christianity or other faith groups. But when it comes to Muslims, I think there is a lot to be done as far as the counseling issues is concerned. This is something very original, I think, contribution. I think with that, we come to the end of our discussion. I would like to thank all of you. Yeah, okay, few questions. All right, I'll try to convey these questions to the speakers, because I have, I think, already done one or two. Let me try to convey them. Okay. One question to Mr. Bilgi. He is asking the following questions. You know, the role of Germany in the European Union, whether it will be increased or not, because Germany is, you know, politically and economically is very strong. and he is asking whether it will be more of a united Germany when it comes to European Union. When it comes to ethnic minorities, I think Western European countries, especially people, they are not interested in political participation because of the maybe election systems. These is something to do with the Islamophobia. I think this question relates to all of the panelists when it comes to political participation and also the people who are elected, whether they are really the voice of the communities that they are coming from. Maybe each and every panelist might respond to that issue only with 1 minute or so, then we can close the session. Maybe we can start with Tikriti about the political participation, if you would like to comment on that.
This is an important point, and this is one of the challenges I believe that face democracy as a whole. One of the big questions that was asked at the beginning of the pandemic, and especially when it really took ground here in the UK, and it was really big in Italy and Spain, it was quite horrific. The question was, does democracy serve us well at times of great crisis? People were looking, for instance, at China, where this supposedly emerged, and they saw that China, this vast country with more than 1 billion population and vast area, managed to control it quite rapidly and quite quickly. Yet, when it came to countries that are developed, that are democratic, that observe human rights and freedoms and the such, decisions were made very, very late. There was a lot of confusion. People didn't know what to do. So all of a sudden, one of the discussions, even on the level of foreign ministries, for instance, I took part in a discussion that was carried out by Chatham House in London, and one of the questions was, is it true that during times of national crisis such as this that we have, that more centralized and probably a little bit authoritarian regimes, they deal with it quicker, faster, and with more control? And is that better to preserve human life? Or is it better, the kind of democracies that we have, that we enjoy in normal times, but which might come and cost us our lives when we have a real crisis? This and other questions on the same line pose a real challenge to the idea and the models of democracy that we have. And this question pertains to the validity of saying, you know what, the solution is more people, and especially ethnic minorities and especially Muslim communities, should take part in politics. I personally think that that's one of the solutions. But to say that this is going to be the whole solution, this is going to solve all the problems, I think that is disingenuous. I don't think it's that easy. I think that the systems we have and the models that we have, they are prohibitive. They do make people feel that they do not belong to the system, that they are on the margins of the system, that their voices don't matter. And this is extremely dangerous. So not only does the system not protect their lives when there is a problem, it also excludes them from real change, from the ability to actually make real change. And the problem is, while someone, for instance, in China or in Russia could say, well, we have a closed political system, we have authoritarianism, we have centralized structures, and therefore we have no voice. And they could say that and people will believe them. You can't say the same in Germany or in France or in Britain. These are democratic structures. These are democratic countries. So why is it that there is failure in terms of, firstly, facing these challenges, also providing the level? One thing, and I'll finish here, one thing that many of my friends who live in the MENA region, they tell me, they say, we don't understand. All our lives, we know that you in the UK or people live in France or Germany or in America, they're wealthy, they're well off, they're comfortable. And we look at them and think that they are rich. How is it possible that our societies, here in the UK, for instance, after only 1 month without a paycheck, without a salary, 60% of the people started feeling economically challenged after only 1 month without a payslip? So what is the meaning of wealth all of a sudden? What is the meaning of abundance? What is the meaning of luxury? It doesn't make any sense. So all these questions, they pose existential challenges to our systems, democratic and otherwise.
Well, thank you very much. I think you have ended up with important question marks in our mind. We should reflect on that, Mr. Tikriti. Now, Bülent, let me rephrase the question to you, because Metehan Çapacı, who is one of our viewers, says we can not talk about, that is what the conclusion actually he is saying. Can we talk about a united Europe or European Union after the crisis? Because he says even at the time now, we cannot talk about a united Germany, then how come we can have a united Europe if there is no united Germany? So it seems that the Metehan has a pessimistic view of the future of European Union, not the whole world. What would be your response to Metehan Çapacı?
Yeah, the future of the European Union, as I said a few minutes ago, when the European Union doesn't start to restructure itself and to reorganize itself, the European Union will fail, unfortunately. This is my position, my point of view, and how I interpret it. This is important. So we see it. We see this division of Europe, not only in a horizontal way, not in the between the societies, between rich and poor. We see it also in a horizontal way between left and right. There is a deep grave between these groups, as I said, horizontal and vertical. So the EU, when the European Union wants to survive, it needs to reorganize, restructure itself, not with protectionism, to be widened and to be open-minded. So this is the one and only alternative for the Europe, from my point of view. And when we see as the role of Germany in Europe, so before the COVID phase, we could say, okay, Britain is out now, and two big bosses are France and Germany. Now we can say there is one big boss, and this is Germany. So Germany regarding the European Union, and Germany needs to take responsibility as well as government, as a leader of the European Union. And Germany needs to take the leadership back again. But in this case, I see issues as well, because Angela Merkel, she will not be chancellor anymore. She is not the chair of the party.
Bülent, okay, we should not go into the future of, and I think that is sufficient enough. But thank you very much for your perspective. Maybe we can go to France for 1 minute and then go to, again, Germany to Dalya, because I think each speaker should have 1 minute, and then we should try to close. So feel free to have your last interventions, please. Mr. Toumi?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So again, to sum up all these excellent feeds and insights, it's important to or imperative to say again, as I stated earlier, the leadership of the Muslim community has to be active again. Therefore, they have to be in public life. They have to also break out or this barrier of non-trust of politics, because their future resides on public life. If they want to be heard, if they want to make, let's say, to correct this cliche that is or has been going on for decades now here in France, just showing or speaking by non-members of this community, meaning by this, leaving the field to the media. And the media, we know, so if they look for, let's say, something to chew on, and this is a perfect selling point for them and for the politicians, notably the far-right party. Let's hear in France, we are on the eve of, it's still 2 years, but the campaign has already started for the presidential election in 2022. And Macron today, he's very, very anxious about his political future. He knows well he's haunted by the ghost of one-term president like his predecessors. So he will definitely move toward the right to contain or to bring, as he's thinking strategically, Marine Le Pen for a matchup in 2022. This is if the Muslims comment, I'm not saying they're going to change the dynamic of the election, but they have to be effective and they have to play a role in it. Meaning by this, they have to go and vote. They have to challenge first of all, their local leaders, and then they have to be on the course of change. And I think to end this, I think the future of the Muslim community stands on solidarity and on unity and, of course, equality. So just last point was very interesting when Dr. Anas mentioned how our brothers and sisters back home see us here all as Bill Gates and buffers. So just one point. So as you mentioned, so here just 1 month, non-pay 1 month, everything stops. This is our moral solidarity because this is our strength. And we are strong when we are like this. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you have pointed out one important topic, that is the solidarity. Now, Dalya, what would be your last intervention? Just 1 minute, please.
Okay. So we have now spoken for about 2 hours, and we did not speak about millions of dead people. So we spoke about economic, social, religious damages. So we can say now, after the peak of the pandemic, that the collateral damages of the pandemic are higher than its own damage. So the reason for this is maybe that the governments and the people, they were too afraid because of this complete new situation. They were maybe afraid of doing less or of doing not enough, and therefore took these very, very strict measures. But now we hear voices of critics or I don't know who say maybe it was not even necessary to close all the schools because we had not the situation of overloaded hospitals, not in Germany, not in Belgium, or also not in London. So my message to the people is take your measures, take whatever is necessary, but do not be a slave of your fears, because this just makes us pessimistic and also is the reason why we could do wrong steps. You know, keep always a positive mind, a clear mind. This is the most important thing. Be clear-minded, be not be a slave of your fears, and I hope the future will become much better than in the last few months.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
With this positive note, because I think we should be all positive and optimistic because life goes on, but also we should take precautions because what matters for us, individual lives matter. We should need to, yes, be careful about that. But you know, this pandemic has been changing our daily lives, social and political dynamics, locally, internationally, and globally. I think there is a lot of discussion, and the discussions and debates will continue. Today, we try to contribute from different perspectives, from London, from Paris, from Berlin, from Germany, three different countries. I would like to thank all of you for sharing your brilliant ideas and also your perspectives on the impact of coronavirus on Muslim communities in Europe. I think we will continue to debate this issue for some time to come. In this respect, I would like to also thank ORSAM, Center for Middle Eastern Research, based in Ankara, for bringing us together and for providing this excellent opportunity to share your views with the whole world when it comes to the Muslims in Europe. And I would like to say goodbye to all of you and hope that we can meet on a different forum to debate the impact of the coronavirus and other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.